For that, welcome back. I'm your host, Chad Everett Broshears, or Sir Chad Everett Broshears to some. If you know, you know. And this is the Maturity Project. Today's conversation is about actually how do you change yourself, and surprise yourself in the process. So I'm 44 years old. I've been through a lot in life in a lot of ways, and I've put myself, me personally, I've been responsible for everything that I've gone through. No, it sucked. And coming to the realization that I've been responsible, you always have the option to look back and say, that's me. That was me. There's no other reason for me to be there other than me. So I've been responsible. And this is part of my radical responsibility. If you have to use it that way, it's getting to the point where it's so comfortable and so consistent that I feel that the radical aspect of that responsibility is starting to drop off. And it's just responsibility. But hey, if you have to use language like that to kind of hype yourself up into getting into the behavior necessary to make those changes and to take that kind of accountability in your life, by all means, use whatever language works for you. But I certainly didn't start here in life. You know, I had my father and my mother, the way that they were and the way that my mother is and the way my father, since he's passed, the way he was. All I could do is go through my memory files about how and who he was as a person and how I was with him and what I got from him in influence and development. And I will tell you that there's a lot of things that were ideas about me that I was given. And, you know, people that care for you and support you and want to see the best for you do give you ideas about you. They give you ideas about how to, you know, be a person and how to function in society. And typically when they acknowledge a specific trait about you, that's when they encourage you to continuously work on and to hold true, because it's a trait that's beneficial for you in society. And what that is, though, is that it is what they've given you an idea about you, and you very well are demonstrating the skills necessary for that idea to be valid. But then you start occupying the thought. Now, this is what was very early age for me. This is back whenever the Maturity Project first came into existence, which has gone by multiple names, but the education itself has still remained the same. It's only grown. It hasn't really changed beyond growth. Actually, it hasn't changed at all beyond growth. There's 8 categories. I founded those back in 2014, and they've just stuck with me. So that's a decade old now. But what I referred to as far as a thought that you hold on to is mental occupation. So when you have an idea that you entertain, you occupy that thought. You're occupying it, which means that you're putting more life into it. You're trying it into a reality that you're suited to understand. You're consistent with, and you really do have a grasp for that particular reality. Then you bring that idea into it, and you let it sit in that realm, right? So if it's that, hey, you're funny, as an easy example here. Hey, you're funny. Well, then it's like, okay, well, you know what? What comes with being funny? Well, there is the group acceptance that you can get, because funny can easily be a key into groups that you are not associated with. You know, think about how many comedians sit there and they give these jokes, especially the successful ones. And when they're done, especially if it's the first time being exposed to this person, which isn't really that easy right now whenever it comes to really good comedians in the realm of popular comedians. But think about a comedian you've never heard of before, and then you've watched or listened to them. By the time they're done with their set, which is what they call them getting up and doing what they do for a living, by the time they're done with their set, do you feel close to them? Do you feel like you kind of get them? Well, that's that access gatekeeper, that it's a key into your group, right? But in that scenario, it's you. But if that person were to show up at a party or wherever that you could actually interact with them directly, you would likely welcome that person into your group. You would introduce them to people. You would get to know them, because they used humor as a way of connecting, which is the key to getting into groups. In this particular example, there's multiple different ways of getting into groups. It's how do you win favor enough to get people to care enough to actually introduce you, or to take you in, then introduce you. or give you access to introduce yourself, however that comes about. So using humor as that thing, well, it started somewhere. Somebody somewhere along the lines told that person, you're pretty funny, or that's funny. Once that concept came into play, then it's hey, I can move between groups with this, or I can get introduced to people this way, or I can be accepted this way. And then comes the work of occupying that thought and start looking for things that seem funny. It's what's funny about this, what's funny about that. They're occupying the thought, and they're actually creating a reality with it. And it is changing who they are in a way, because a lot of the times whenever that's starting to develop, it's the person really doesn't have that solid set character. It's in the earlier stages of their development that they get the idea, the inclination that they'd be humorous. Or they have somebody they idolize and think that person's funny. And then they start molding or cloning the behavior. Mold the behavior behind them or in a way that's similar to them. Or cloning the behavior, trying to be them. Excuse me, if you will. They're playing the role of it and trying it out. But what that is it's taking the person from being moldable in a place and time whenever they really don't have necessarily like a strong personality about themselves and the character traits necessary to support that personality, which is also interesting. Which comes first, the traits or the personality? Because you have traits that associate with the personality that strengthen it, that give you the confidence that you are that person, and that builds you into a reality that you are convinced that you're that person. Challenges are is that sometimes and often that becomes limiting, because you should always be true to yourself, but how do you get to that? Well, what I'm talking about right now helps you get to those places, and you can change a lot about you at any stage of your life. People surrender to the idea once you get to a certain age, you're not changing. That's a sad reality. Now, yeah, you can go ahead and live fully into everything that you've created up until that point based off of what everybody else is giving you feedback on and what you feel good about holding in as far as traits and things. But as far as changing things, if you want to do it, you can do it at any age. The reason why it gets harder when we get older is because we become reliant on the feedback that we have had and the success rate values throughout our entirety of our life in all circumstances. And then we say, this is the best model for me to occupy. Now, again, this is not a conscious conversation. This is a subconscious behavioral assessment of how people are. So if you want to change things, think about the comedian or the beginning. Whenever somebody realizes that they're funny, they're not a comedian yet. That's not a qualifier yet. It is a qualifying value that's necessary to be a comedian, but there's not enough history built around it, and their thinking model isn't quite there yet. They had to start somewhere. So if you want to change something about you, understand what it is you want to change, get a hold of the idea of what it is that you want to change that's supportive, whatever the thinking processes are that's supportive of that particular behavior. Understand that the older you are, the more involved you are in people's lives, the less likely they are to support you in the initial change. And getting people enrolled in that, you can be direct and honest. Hey, I'm trying out something else. I really am working on myself to change. And I would like that, it just play with me with this, or work with me on it, or support me with these changes. This will help me in my life if you can support me with it. Come up with a compassionate conversation of authenticity and sincerity. And that is easier to enroll people in than to just change and expect them to accept it. Because most people build profile values about another person's behavior and figure out how those things work with their own. And that's how they start assessing whether or not they're friends with somebody, or if they're spending time with them and how they spend time with them. Because it's about taking care of yourself. If you like growth, you may find people that help you grow, and it depends on what method and model of growth you like. But ultimately, the goal is this. You understand who you are and who you spend your time with, and then look at currently how you are and say, is this the way I want my life to be? And is this the way that I want people to know me? Now, have confidence and conviction in who you are, but at the same time, understand what you really want to accomplish. The majority of us are occupying behaviors that we were given and that we learned through surviving the moment as people are interacting with us, and we're trying to connect to whatever degree we're trying to connect to and however we want to be known. There's a great deal of us that have no idea. We're just kind of like set on this autopilot with other people putting the input into the system, versus being the person that truly controls your destiny. No, you're always going to have the circumstances of life around you and the environment that you cannot control. All you can do is whether you put yourself in that environment or not. And even then, you're going to be in some environment. If you're like afraid to live, then you're in an isolated environment. And from that, you will over time pick up the traits that are associated with isolation, which are typically less and less socially acceptable. Odd behaviors, not being able to speak easily to other people, doing goofy things, stuff like that, that just have people go, I'm not quite certain about this person. I don't know how I feel about this person. A lot of that's also how much somebody else is willing to expose themselves to you, because you can change them by consistency of exposure. Because every time you have to navigate a personality around you, you have to think in a certain way to navigate that person. If you consistently have yourself around that person, it starts to change who you are to consideration of that person in a way that you can work with them, so that you don't overstimulate the mode, if you will. And some people do like conflict, and some people seek it out. But my question is, why would they seek that out? But I'm not really wanting to take that route in this conversation, because we're so dynamic as a species. We're incredibly dynamic. So it's more about, if you spend time with somebody because, let's say, it's a work situation, how you navigate that relationship changes you because of the consistency and the way that you have to think in that scenario. Because your job you have to survive your job, right? You need that thing to live in order for you to live, right? You can't have your job life die, because then your financial life gets challenged, nearly everybody, right? And then also your sense of purpose, your communal structure and values, and how you associate and how you are in your community, those things all start to get challenged. So instead of dealing with all of the consequences of changing yourself in a way that challenges your job, you change in a way to work with that person, whether that's avoidance or whatever it is. But guess what? When you choose avoidance, that model of behavior will affect you elsewhere. It is not just in that situation. You're developing a skill of avoidance, which means that it comes at a cost. You're paying conflict resolution. You're paying that in exchange for avoidance. So it's an economy, and you are better to understand it so that you can navigate the future you want to develop yourself into. So if you want to be better with money, you've got to start the conversation with money. You've got to build the idea of money and understand why you don't have it. And for people to say, I just don't make enough money to have money. Well, that's not true. I know plenty of people that they live so far below their means that they have abundance, and that no matter how much money they make, they're calculated in a way that they don't live over their means. I have other people, and this is very common in our culture, unfortunately, where you live above your means, and you're constantly in the struggle of making enough money just to be able to pay your bills. But all it takes is one paycheck, and you're really in trouble. Because there's a behavior that supports that. There's a mindset. There's an occupation of thought that support that. And what exactly is that occupation of thought? If you want to change it, get to the point where you say, okay, well, if I can't grab that tiger by its tail, then I'm going to set a contrary behavior and thinking in place to overcome it. So I'm going to start strengthening this other thing. Eventually, whatever it is that led you to it will likely become obvious, and then you can do something with it. but it's not necessarily required in order to achieve what you want. As much as you get another thought and you start occupying that thought, you put effort into thinking about it, and you say, I like that. Most of us need to write it down or have it as a mantra that we use on a daily basis. That's why mantras work for people if it's consistent. Vision boards is actually also why vision boards work. When you put stuff on a vision board and you put it someplace you can see it regularly, what you're doing is you're actually thinking about it. And you're reminding your subconscious mind on top of your conscious mind when you take a second. If you create a ritualistic behavior of it, it's going to be even more impactful because you're going to have the ritualistic behavior supported in a way that first thing or whatever it is, you have to pick a ritual. So I'm not saying a ritualistic thing requires that you do it first thing in the morning. That ritualistic thing could simply be, you know what, we can use the morning, but it could be any time of day. For me personally, I'm a morning person. I wake up at 3 a.m. That's not a brag. I just have a lot to do before my first timed responsibility comes into play. My first accountability thing, which is my job, right? Well, actually, my first accountability thing is to be with my son to get him ready for daycare. That's my first time thing that I'm responsible for, other than my personal ritualistic things and going to the gym. So now, if we want to make these changes, pick your time frame and work on it. Again, I'm first thing in the morning kind of guy. So I will, I like to get up early, and then I have the things that I do to get my day started. And it helps me with the preparation for the way the day is going to work. I remind myself of what I want to accomplish that day. I put the effort into framing my thinking in a way that's going to be supportive of it. And then I solidify that as best I can by giving myself convicting statements about that. Like, I will achieve X, whatever that is. Or that I will get to that today. Those are convicting. And putting myself in a position of conviction, and then my integrity helps me support that, which is why you don't want to lie. Because every time you lie, your integrity is challenged. And if your integrity is challenged enough, it doesn't matter to you either. So you telling yourself, I'm going to make these changes, you're lying to yourself. You have a model of lying that all you need is the right amount of stress, and then you're just not going to do it. It's just you're going to write yourself an out. You got a checkpoint of getting out of the situation. So pick something. Again, pick it. This could easily be you just do it first thing in the morning. I prefer that because that's my way. I really can't speak into doing it in the afternoon or doing it in the evening. It's not the method that works for me. I like to frame my entire day based on it. So early on in my development, where I started taking responsibility, when I started taking responsibility for who I am and what I've developed myself into, was whenever I decided to leave the power company. So I worked for the power industry for it's 10 plus years. So it's close to 11 years roughly. Which is, I worked in the power plants where they generate electricity and then it gets distributed to the lines and the consumer gets it. So I worked in the power plants. Also, it did affect my hearing, unfortunately, which I was too arrogant to accept some thoughts. Whatever, anyway, I'm not going to go down that route just to know that, but it is a consequence of it. Now, with my time in the power company, I was like, I don't want to live into this life. I've been somebody that's always out to make my own life. That is a definite statement for me. I'm going to make my life. I'm not going to live others. I'm not going to live my father's life. I'm not going to live my brother's life. But my dad had retired from working for the power company. It's a different company at the time. Anyway, that's all extra detail, but it's the same company, but it was bought out. Okay, so my brother Jason, who is slightly older than I am, about 3 years, he worked for them as well. And then I got a job working for them because it was good money. And at that stage of my 20s, it's like, just make some good money and then, let that grow into a career. It's a good idea. And I was dedicated to it, 11 years of it. So I went through a lot. We don't need to go into the minutia about all the things and the heavy details about exactly everything I went through, but just know that that is a challenging and dangerous world to live in. And I elected not to continue that life. I realized by looking around me that the people, I'll give you this because it is valuable for context. There was a hiring freeze in it because it was a union job. there was about a 20-year gap between the new hires and then the people that were the standard employees that had been there for a while that were entering the age of retirement. So I had this big gap that I could observe, and I've always been very observant. I'm an analytical person. So I was looking at this gap and going, okay, that's a 20-year difference. I've got a lot to learn was the first thing that I thought of, because these people are going to retire within the next 5 years. And most of them far less than the 5 years. And that's the talent that the company needs in order to continue to run this. And there's nobody else to train us unless we go from outside of the business. And first is to get it done from inside of the business. So we're like, okay, well, we got a lot to learn here. And then I started looking at the behaviors for the people that were at that level. And I started to consider their satisfaction in life. Were they happy or were they not? And I'm like, you know what? I realized there's a trend. Every single person that I worked with had a level of misery about their life that was not something that they were proud of, something that they took great responsibility for. They were all a consequence of it. Excuse me. The one person that kind of stands out that wasn't necessarily so miserable was Kevin. Love that guy. He was fantastic. Worked on my shift with me. He still wasn't completely satisfied, but he wasn't like the worst of them. But the only time that I saw joy on their faces was either whenever they gave each other a really hard time for humor's sake, and even then it was incredibly short-lived, and what the claim was you have to be thick-skinned, otherwise you're going to be, it's not going to work, right? It's like take a good ribbon. But that's also because that was camaraderie. It's what guys do, that kind of thing, and that's how they pass the time and try to take out all of the undesirable aspects as much as they can. Excuse me. So, but I realized that the majority of the joys that I actually it seemed to be the only joy that these people had was whenever their payday came up. And I'll tell you, it was, you could see them see their paycheck, and then they went from, okay, either a straight face with a little smirk, a decent smirk or a smile, or, okay, and you saw that they just had a moment, they weren't that upset. And that was it. It's payday. The majority of them also complained that the people that were in their lives, their loved ones, took for granted who they are and what they did. For them working so hard, and they didn't give them credit for all of the stuff. They just gave them a hard time. And I thought to myself, that's not the future I want. I do not want to be that person. I'm not going to exchange the satisfaction that I will have in life for that moment of the paycheck. I am not strong enough as a person to persevere and be the difference in this scenario. That's not the way that I'm going to have my life, and I'm not going to run that risk. I'm going to have to leave this. So I left the security. It was an easily well over a six-figure income, and in a very secure situation, because the union provides a lot of security and it's power, so it's not a industry that's going to disappear overnight by any means. So, but I left it because I did not want to occupy the thoughts necessary to get to that point where that I would turn into that person that's just miserable, that I'd have the broken family, that I would be, just dissatisfied in life, waiting for a disease to take me. And I'm not, and I love these guys. These guys are great people. They were so fundamentally beneficial to me. And I hope that I did give them a great degree of value also for our experiences together. So good people, I'm not downing them. It's not my walk in life, and I chose it not to be, because I am the creator of my life in the way that I'm going to live it the way that I can. And however I got here, God, or whatever it is you want to hold, and then the genetics that I was given by my parents, and then everything else is going to be the environment and my decisions. So I am responsible for the environment I put myself in and the decisions that I have. But I have to think when I'm there, and I'm responsible for the way that I think, so that I don't get into building ideas about where I am, who I am, and how I am, to become contradictory to the person that I'm building myself into becoming. So I do not want it to take me away from my goals in life. And that's why whenever I start getting thoughts that don't work so well with them, I've got to manage them. Some of them are a lot harder to deal with than others, but I'm constantly in the be responsible for what you think, because what you think turns into thoughts, and what your thought is turns into ideas. And what your ideas are doing is getting root value into changing who you are, because they develop into a thinking pattern that becomes easier to access, and you start navigating the way that life is happening around you in a way that makes sense to that idea, so that it strengthens it. Or eventually you just discard it because you realize that it's just absolutely unattainable. And sometimes those ideas are what you want, but you run into adversity, but no one has been there to tell you that's expected, and to stay consistent, persevere. So as I did in my previous video about, even the rock gives way to the stream. But you would think that you could move the water easier than you can move the rock, that the rock would persevere and overcome. And that's not the way it works. Eventually, the river erodes the rock. So it's up to you what you do with this. Create the life that you want. But if you want to make these changes, get an idea. But first, so think something that feels like it's, hey, I want that to happen. And then from that, let's say I got the idea about who I want to be. That's great. Now, let me get to the point that I not only have the idea, let's build the reality into that and stay consistent. Make it into something that you practice on a daily basis. You wake up in the morning and you tell yourself, this is it. This makes sense. This is who I am. Whatever it is, tell yourself that. Work your way into it. Get an idea that you want to work with and put it into action. Tell yourself, again, for me, first thing in the morning is what works best, and I can only speak from that. So tell yourself first thing in the morning if that's what's going to work for you, which again, I can only speak from that. So tell yourself first thing in the morning, this is the idea that I really want. So this is my reality. And then make it happen. Okay? It's just, you have to build consistency. It's really good to write it down, because it makes you take it from your mind into some state of reality. External of you, it's written down. And then read it. But keep telling yourself that, working your way through it. That'll help you get where you want to be. Now, it's going to take practice. This stuff doesn't happen overnight. But, what else are you going to do anyway? You got time. And even then also, it's who you be inspires others. So it's up to you. All right, that's what I got for today. Again, I'm your host, Chad Everett Broshears, or Sir Chad Everett Broshears to some. If you know, you know. And this is the Maturity Project. I appreciate you checking in. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can get the videos when they go live. Share this video with a person in your life you want to break the ice with, to start that conversation. We got a lot of work to do. The world needs us, but we really got to work on ourselves first, because the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And let's not make a super highway to hell. All right, until next time, guys, gals, really appreciate your time and your attention. And let's get to it, okay? That's it. Let's go.